If you're watching this right now, hit subscribe, tap like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because once the story begins, there's no turning back. The sirens started screaming just after midnight, cutting through the humid Venezuelan air like a warning from another world. Red and blue lights bounced off concrete walls stained by decades of neglect, corruption, and blood. Inside El Rodeo prison, the ground trembled, not from an earthquake, but from something far more deliberate. Guards ran toward the noise, boots slipping on wet floors, radios crackling with overlapping panic. One voice kept repeating the same phrase, over and over, as if saying it enough times might make it less real. "They're coming up from below." El Rodeo had always been dangerous. Everyone in Venezuela knew that. It wasn't just a prison, it was a city within walls, ruled by gangs, weapons, and invisible deals struck in the dark. But what was happening that night was different. This wasn't a riot. This wasn't chaos for chaos' sake. This was a plan. Deep beneath one of the cell blocks, a tunnel collapsed inward, spilling dirt, broken concrete, and something else, fresh air. Men emerged from the hole like ghosts, faces smeared with mud, eyes burning with a mix of desperation and certainty. They had been digging for months. Maybe longer. By the time the first gunshot echoed through the corridor, it was already too late to pretend this was contained. Outside the prison walls, residents in nearby neighborhoods woke to the sound of explosions. Windows rattled. Dogs barked. Mothers pulled children from their beds and dropped to the floor. No one needed the news to tell them where the noise was coming from. El Rodeo had a reputation, and tonight, it was living up to it. Inside the prison, guards tried to regroup, forming defensive lines with shields that had seen better decades. But confusion spread faster than any command. Some lights went out. Others flickered. Smoke crept through hallways, blurring vision and burning lungs. Somewhere in the darkness, keys jangled, then stopped abruptly. By dawn, several guards were dead. Dozens more were injured. And the question on everyone's lips was the same. How did this happen? 2 days earlier, Inspector Mateo Rojas stood at the edge of El Rodeo's outer gate, staring up at the watchtowers. He had worked organized crime for 15 years and prisons for 5. Nothing about this place surprised him anymore, or so he thought. Rojas wasn't supposed to be there. His visit wasn't on the official schedule. But an anonymous tip had landed on his desk with a single sentence that refused to leave his mind. "They're digging. And they're not digging alone." Inside the administrative office, the air smelled of stale coffee and damp paper. Files were stacked everywhere, many of them untouched for years. Rojas asked for recent inspection reports. The clerk hesitated before handing them over, eyes darting toward the hallway. Most of the pages were copies of copies. Signatures repeated. Dates didn't line up. And every report concluded with the same phrase, "No irregularities detected." Rojas knew better. He had seen what no irregularities really meant in Venezuelan prisons. It meant bribes. It meant silence. It meant someone higher up didn't want questions asked. As he left the building, Rojas noticed something else. A supply truck exiting through the side gate. Nothing unusual, except it was leaving empty. No boxes. No inventory tags. Just a driver who refused to make eye contact. Rojas memorized the license plate. Inside cell block C, inmate Luis El Ingeniero Marquez lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't the biggest man in the prison. He wasn't the loudest. But when Marquez spoke, people listened. Before his arrest, he had studied civil engineering. He knew soil composition, load-bearing structures, and how long it took for concrete to crack under pressure. Inside El Rodeo, that knowledge made him powerful. Marquez didn't dig with his own hands. He didn't have to. Others did that for him, trading sweat and silence for promises of freedom. He coordinated schedules, counted shifts, calculated distances. Every spoonful of dirt removed from the tunnel was measured. And every guard who turned a blind eye was paid. The tunnel wasn't just an escape route. It was leverage. It meant options. It meant control. But there was a problem. Someone was talking. The first body was found during a routine head count the morning before the escape attempt. An inmate in the infirmary, officially listed as sick with a fever. The guards wrote it off as another death inside El Rodeo. Tragic, but not unusual. Rojas didn't buy it. The man had bruises on his wrists, mud under his fingernails, and a look on his face that suggested fear, not illness. Rojas requested surveillance footage from the infirmary hallway. The video file was corrupted. Conveniently, that night, Rojas made a call to a journalist he trusted, Sofia Alvarez. She had been investigating prison corruption for years and had sources inside places no one else could reach. "What do you know about tunnels?" Rojas asked. There was a pause on the line. "Enough to know that if someone's digging at El Rodeo," Alvarez said slowly, "it's not a small operation. And if they're willing to kill to protect it, it means they're close." Close to what? Freedom. Back inside the prison, tension thickened. Gangs that usually cooperated kept their distance. Whispered arguments broke out over food lines. Some inmates refused to leave their cells. They could feel it coming. On the night of the escape attempt, Marquez checked his watch for the final time. The tunnel was ready. The guards were paid. The weapons were already inside the walls, smuggled piece by piece through kitchens, workshops, and medical supplies. All it would take was a spark. That spark came sooner than expected. A guard panicked. Maybe he had second thoughts. Maybe he realized that money wouldn't save him once the world found out what he'd done. He reached for his radio. The gunshot echoed louder than planned. And suddenly, the plan unraveled into chaos. By sunrise, helicopters circled overhead. Politicians stood behind podiums, promising investigations and crackdowns. Officials blamed gangs. Gangs blamed rival factions. Everyone denied responsibility. But as Rojas stood at the sealed entrance of the collapsed tunnel, staring into the darkness below, he noticed something chilling. The tunnel didn't end where the authorities said it did. It went further, much further, and scratched into the dirt wall, just before the collapse, were 3 words written in shaky letters. This was practice. If this pulled you in, you're not ready for what comes next. The morning after the failed escape attempt, the air over Caracas was thick with tension, heavy with the silence that follows chaos. The city buzzed with rumors. The media had swarmed El Rodeo, hungry for blood and answers, but the truth was buried deeper than the rubble at the bottom of that tunnel. Inspector Mateo Rojas was back on the scene before dawn, boots crunching over the broken concrete and twisted steel barricades that marked the prison's temporary lockdown. The gate was sealed tight, guarded by riot police, but Rojas had clearance that most didn't, and a resolve that only hardened with every new discovery. Inside the command center, monitors flickered with grainy footage, static-filled calls, and maps outlining every inch of El Rodeo. The chaos that had erupted was no spontaneous revolt. It was the calculated finale of months, maybe years, of careful planning. And the mastermind was still somewhere inside these walls. Rojas' first order was to tighten the net around Luis El Ingeniero Marquez. The man's engineering skills made him the perfect architect for the escape tunnel, but Marquez wasn't a lone wolf. He was the hub of a dangerous web. If you cut one thread, the whole network might unravel. Across the city, Sofia Alvarez sat in a cramped cafe, nursing a bitter coffee, her fingers trembling as she skimmed through encrypted messages sent by a whistleblower inside El Rodeo. The text spoke of an underground economy fueled by bribes and weapons smuggled through corrupt guards. But one name kept popping up: Warden Gustavo Morales. Morales was supposed to be the authority inside El Rodeo, the man responsible for order and discipline. But whispers painted a different picture: a man who turned a blind eye, or worse, facilitated, the chaos. Morales was rumored to have deep ties to the gangs, pockets lined with illicit cash, and a ruthless streak that kept inmates and staff alike in check. Sofia's investigation uncovered disturbing patterns. Food supplies went missing only to reappear in the hands of prisoners. Medical supplies turned into weapons. Even the guards' patrol schedules were leaked with uncanny precision. Why would Morales allow this? Or was he part of it? Back inside El Rodeo, the prisoners had changed. The usual cacophony of shouts and slamming cell doors gave way to whispered warnings and nervous glances. Some inmates wore expressions of fear, others of anger. The failed escape had fractured alliances and painted targets on the backs of suspected collaborators. Marquez was nowhere to be seen. Rumors spread that he had been moved, quietly, swiftly, away from prying eyes. Some said he was dead. Others whispered he had been smuggled out through the tunnel, a ghost among shadows. The guards refused to comment. Rojas' team discovered a hidden network of tunnels far more extensive than anyone had imagined. These weren't just escape routes, they were arteries of power running beneath the prison, connecting different blocks and even reaching beyond the walls into the city's underworld. Every discovery raised more questions. Who else knew about these tunnels? How deep did the corruption run? And most chillingly, what was the ultimate goal? At the center of it all was a new player, Alejandro El Lobo Vargas, a ruthless gang leader recently transferred to El Rodeo from a rival prison. Vargas was known for his brutality and strategic mind, and many feared he had orchestrated the escape attempt as a demonstration of power. Rojas needed to find Vargas, and fast. If the escape attempt was just the beginning, the prison's walls might not hold for long. Outside, political pressure mounted. Venezuelan officials promised sweeping reforms and harsh punishments. But to many, the real story was a warning. If a prison as notorious as El Rodeo could be breached from within, no institution was safe. Sofia Alvarez prepared to release her exposé, risking everything to shed light on a system riddled with secrets and lies. And deep beneath the surface, in the shadows where silence ruled, the truth waited patiently. The investigation was no longer just about a failed escape. It was about unmasking the forces that turned a prison into a battleground, and a warning that the next outbreak of violence could be just around the corner. As Rojas stared at the maps sprawled across the table, a single name caught his eye, one he hadn't expected. A name that belonged to someone he trusted. If you think the story is intense so far, wait until the next chapter. The deeper we dig, the darker it gets. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because this is just the beginning. The ghosts in the walls. The oppressive heat inside El Rodeo was relentless, seeping through the cracks of rusted bars and peeling paint. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, rot, and fear. Behind every grimy window and crumbling wall, secrets festered like wounds refusing to heal. But for Inspector Mateo Rojas, the prison itself seemed alive, watching, waiting, ready to swallow anyone who dared uncover its darkest truths. Rojas paced the command center, eyes burning red from sleepless nights filled with piecing together fragments of a puzzle that refused to form. The name that haunted his thoughts was not just a name, it was a betrayal. Captain Diego Herrera. A man who had once been Rojas's closest ally in the fight against organized crime, Herrera was now at the center of an unfolding nightmare. The evidence came in drips and bursts, encrypted messages intercepted, unexplained transfers of weapons, suspicious behavior caught on shaky CCTV footage. But the smoking gun was found in a discarded phone, wrapped in plastic, hidden beneath a pile of laundry in one of the inmate cells. It was Herrera's voice, caught in a series of audio messages, negotiating with gang leaders, setting schedules for guards to look the other way during critical hours, even directing the smuggling of explosives into the prison. Betrayal was a word that barely skimmed the surface. Rojas clenched his fists. The man he trusted was a key architect of the chaos. Meanwhile, within the prison walls, Alejandro El Lobo Vargas tightened his grip. His reputation for cold-blooded efficiency spread like wildfire through the cells and corridors. Where Marquez had been the engineer of escape, Vargas was the enforcer of fear. A recent transfer from a rival penitentiary, Vargas was no stranger to brutality. His eyes held a cold intelligence, calculating every move, every threat, every opportunity. On this day, Vargas stood in the center of cell block B, flanked by his loyal followers. He addressed the inmates with a chilling calmness. "We control the tunnels," he declared. "The guards only serve us when they know fear. But the city outside fears us more." His words sent a shudder through the crowd. The tunnels, once thought to be mere escape routes, were now understood to be something far more sinister. They were underground passageways of power, secret trade routes for drugs, weapons, and influence. They connected El Rodeo to corrupt officials, to crime bosses in Caracas, and even to factions within the Venezuelan military. Rojas's investigation uncovered chilling details: payments disguised as prison maintenance, shipments declared as medical supplies but loaded with ammunition, and at least one weapon smuggling route that led straight to the heart of government. At the same time, Sofia Alvarez's exposé had gone live. The story ripped through social media and news outlets like a wildfire. The headline, "Inside El Rodeo: How Corruption, Violence, and Betrayal Built Venezuela's Most Dangerous Prison." Public outcry surged. Families of guards killed in the breakout demanded answers. International human rights groups called for investigations. But the government remained silent, protecting its own while the crisis deepened. But for Rojas, the pressure was personal. With Herrera's betrayal exposed, his world was unraveling. How many others were compromised? How deep did the rot run? And who, in the shadows, was pulling the strings? One night, a shadowy figure slipped through the prison corridors, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every secret passage. The figure stopped at a concealed door, hidden behind stacks of crates. Inside was the nerve center of the escape attempt, the control room for the tunnel network. But what lay within wasn't just maps and weapons. It was a ledger, a record of bribes, payoffs, and alliances that implicated some of the country's highest officials. The ledger's last entry was dated mere days before the failed breakout. Rojas received an anonymous tip directing him to the secret room. As he and his team descended into the dark, damp tunnels, the weight of what they were about to uncover pressed down on them. The tunnels twisted and turned like a snake's spine, the walls slick with moisture and secrets. Finally, they reached the hidden door. The lock was old, but the hinges groaned as it opened, revealing shelves lined with folders, binders, and loose papers. Rojas's breath caught. This was no ordinary prison record. This was the blueprint of corruption. As Rojas flipped through the pages, one name appeared. The walls of El Rodeo prison echoed with a silence that was heavier than any riotous chaos. But beneath the stillness lurked a storm ready to break, a storm fueled by fear, betrayal, and vengeance. Inspector Mateo Rojas walked through the corridors like a man haunted by ghosts. The ledger he had found deep in the tunnels was a bombshell, a dossier revealing ties between top politicians, corrupt guards, and the merciless gangs ruling the prison. Every page was a nail in the coffin of Venezuela's justice system. Yet, just as Rojas prepared to bring the evidence to light, the ground beneath him shifted. That night, an explosion rocked the prison's western wing. Flames roared like beasts, licking the cracked concrete and burning away the thin veneer of control the authorities had left. Inmates screamed, guards scrambled, and chaos swallowed the compound whole. Rojas received the call as he was driving home, the city lights blurring through his windshield. El Rodeo's on fire. We've lost control. The fire was no accident. It was retaliation. Alejandro El Lobo Vargas had sent a clear message. The tunnels were more than escape routes. They were weapons, and the gangs were ready to use them. Inside the burning building, inmates broke free, armed and furious. Gunshots echoed through the smoke-filled air as Rojas raced to the scene, his heart pounding with urgency. Every step closer felt like walking into a death trap. The corridors twisted in smoke and shadow. Rojas and a small team of officers pushed forward, rescuing trapped guards and inmates alike. But the prison had become a war zone. Behind the chaos, the true puppet master revealed himself, not Vargas, not Marquez, but Warden Gustavo Morales. As flames consumed the West Wing, Morales slipped away through a secret exit, disappearing into the night. The betrayal cut deep. Morales had been orchestrating the destruction to cover his tracks, destroy the ledger, erase the evidence, and silence anyone who stood in his way. Rojas realized the fight was no longer just about prison security. It was about exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of power. In the aftermath, the government scrambled to contain the damage. Media blackouts, official denials, and promises of reform filled the headlines, but inside El Rodeo, nothing was fixed. The wounds were too deep. Marquez was found, wounded but alive. hidden in the rubble of the collapsed tunnel. He whispered of deeper betrayals, secret deals, and a plan that went far beyond escape. And then the twist no one saw coming. As Rojas dug further, he uncovered a series of coded messages hinting that the failed escape was only the opening act. A larger, more devastating breakout was planned. The clock was ticking. El Rodeo was a powder keg. And in the shadows, the next move was already being made. If you think this story has kept you on edge, brace yourself. The final chapter will bring the truth crashing down and reveal secrets that could shake a nation. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The night air over Caracas was thick with tension, each breath a reminder of the fragility holding the city's darkest secret in place. Inside El Rodeo, the prison had transformed into a fortress on the brink of collapse. The walls, scarred by fire and violence, now bore witness to a final act of desperation. Inspector Mateo Rojas stood at the edge of the compound, the weight of the investigation crushing down on him. The evidence was undeniable: the ledger, the betrayals, the smuggling routes, and Morales's treachery. But the most chilling discovery was still ahead. As dawn approached, intelligence intercepted from informants inside El Rodeo revealed a terrifying plan: a coordinated mass breakout, bigger and deadlier than the one that had failed months earlier. Alejandro El Lobo Vargas was orchestrating it, backed by corrupted guards and, disturbingly, silent allies outside the prison. The tunnels weren't just escape routes anymore, they were battle lines. Rojas and his team scrambled to prepare, but the prison's internal collapse was unstoppable. At midnight, the assault began. Explosions rocked the foundation, alarms blared, and the air filled with gunfire and screams. Prisoners flooded the corridors, armed with smuggled weapons and an unyielding hunger for freedom. Chaos erupted like a storm. Rojas moved through the bedlam, coordinating with riot police and negotiating with desperate inmates. Faces flashed past, some filled with rage, others with fear. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred. Then, in the chaos, Rojas came face to face with Vargas. The gang leader's eyes were cold and calculating. There was no remorse, only survival. "You don't understand," Vargas spat. "This place is a cage built by liars and thieves. Tonight we break free." The fight was brutal. Gunshots echoed off concrete, bodies fell, and the prison became a crucible of violence and desperation. Amidst the chaos, Rojas found the hidden control room, the heart of the tunnel network. There, he discovered plans for a smuggling operation that linked not just to Morales, but to high-ranking officials across Venezuela. The conspiracy was a machine far larger than anyone had imagined. In the final moments, Morales was captured attempting to flee through a hidden exit, his face twisted with fear and rage. Marquez, battered but alive, testified against him, revealing the full extent of the corruption. The aftermath left El Rodeo in ruins. The government faced unprecedented scrutiny. Reform talks began, but the scars ran deep. For Rojas, the victory was bittersweet. The prison had been exposed, the criminals caught, but the system itself remained fragile. As the sun rose over Caracas, the city awoke to a hard truth: the battle against corruption and violence was far from over. The shadows inside El Rodeo had been pushed back, but they still lurked in places unseen. They thought the nightmare was over. But 3 months later, another prison in Venezuela suffered a similar breakout, with the same signature. If you thought this story